Okay, Bio 33. We are going to do cardiovascular today. It's going to be used for cardiovascular today. In the summer, we're going to use it for Bio 31. Anyway, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to take you over here to these columns. We're going to talk about the cardiovascular system. What is cardiovascular mean? Where is the heart located at in the body? Some of the technical terms you've heard when you read ahead on this one was mediastinum. There's a cavity called the pericardial cavity. It's found in the thoracic cavity. That's from your bottom rib up to your throat. The sac that protects it's called the pericardium. It has an outside layer called the fibrous, has an inside layer called the serous. The inside layer has two subdivisions, parietal and visceral. It's full of a fluid called pericardial fluid. Infection of that is called pericarditis. Infection or inflammation of the heart muscle itself is called myocarditis. Muscle. When you see the word myo or sarco, essentially myo means muscle. Sarco means muscle cell. We'll do that when we get to muscles, but you're going to see that term again. There's actually 3 layers to the heart muscle itself. We call it heart muscle, but it has an outside covering that's not muscle, and that's called the epicardium. The muscle part, the cardiac muscle, is called the myocardium. And then the inside, a thin layer that lines the chambers is called endocardium. We have a 4-chambered heart, 2 atria, 2 ventricles. We have a 4-valved heart, and it's 2 atrioventricular, 2 semilunar. We're going to talk about some of the blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart and towards the heart. We're going to find the superior and inferior vena cava are the 2 main pipes that bring blood back to the right side of the heart, which is the right atrium. Also the coronary vein that brings blood back from the heart itself. Goes into the right atrium, which is the first chamber. There's an auricle, I'll explain that and what the 60-40 means. And then the right atrioventricular valve, tricuspid valve, the right ventricle, a zygos vein, and then we're going to go on and talk about how those valves actually work. I have that down there. In fact, we have this new remote control. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Whoop. How a little fast, huh? Bet you that messed up your brain. I don't want to go too far. I'm going to zoom in on it. Okay, you can see over here, you can't see me. Let's see, where am I at? Oh, I got it on the wrong side. That didn't go well. There we go. I don't know how this is going to work. Anyway, right here, we have, I'm talking, with these 2 terms, I'm going to explain how a valve works in a heart, how you get the lub-dub sound in the heart. You might, if you have any thoughts about it, feel that a valve closes because something pulls on it or constricts, and that's not what happens in the heart. Blood actually closes the valve. Using Chordae Tendinae and Papillary Muscle is so we don't have prolapse. Since the valve expands, since the chamber expands and closes and constricts with each heartbeat, with each pumping, we have to have that extra tissue when it's constricted. When it's expanded, there is no extra tissue. So the extra tissue, when it's constricted, is called trabecula. We saw that with our bones. And then the valve that closes off the pulmonary artery is called the pulmonary semilunar valve, which is one of the semilunar valves. Pulmonary trunk is when it's heading to the lungs. It goes when a blood vessel leads away from the heart, it's called an artery. When it comes back towards the heart, it's called a vein. So the pulmonary artery is the artery that's carrying unoxygenated blood to the lungs. where it's oxygenated. It comes back by pulmonary vein. So it's a blood vessel it's a vein that carries oxygenated blood. Goes into the right atrium. We're going to see auricle again, and I'll explain that. The valve that separates the atrium from the ventricle is called the atrioventricular valve. In this case, it's the left side, but it has three names: mitral, bicuspid, and left atrioventricular valve. It also set up just like the right side with Chordae Tendinae, papillary muscle. When it leaves the left ventricle, it goes through a valve called the aortic semilunar valve, and then it's the aorta. The aorta is divided into the ascending, the arch, and the descending. Then I'll erase the board and come back, and there'll be a whole bunch more stuff written up about what a PQRST wave is, blood through the heart, how conduction occurs through the heart because it's electric, and it's called autorhythmia, and so forth. Okay, so let me back this over to this side. Wrong. Remember this lab? Used to be cool to be in here, huh? I have a lab that goes with this. I got to back it out a little bit. What I'm going to try and do is cut so you can see some of you have been telling me that the lettering isn't very clear. So I'm trying to capitalize on that. Good, I can catch the board because I'm going to do my drawings right here. That way I can make it as big as possible. Okay, I'm going to get us started here in just a second. We're going to go ahead and pause this. Okay, here we go. The topic is cardiovascular system. It's one of the 11 or 9 systems that we examine in anatomy or anatomy physiology. The cardio portion of it is the heart. I'm going to move that a little bit so you guys can see me. Wrong. Right. Because I know you want to see me. Okay, I dressed up for you. You're still in your pajamas. Okay, the cardio portion is the heart. The vascular portion is the tubes that carry the blood. We have a closed circulatory system. What that means is there's no holes in it, so we can pressurize it. If it does get a hole in it, we have to stop it or the pressure starts to go down. And that's when we do clotting. Okay, when you read the chapter on the cardiovascular system, the first part of it was the heart. And it talked about its location. It went on for about 3 pages talking about the location of the heart. The heart is in the thoracic cavity. If you take your bottom rib, feel your bottom rib, there's a muscle, a cup-shaped muscle that separates your top half from your bottom half. The top half is called a thoracic cavity. The bottom half is called the abdominal cavity. In the thoracic cavity, we have 2 main things: the heart, which is kind of in the center, and the lungs, which are on each side of it. Here we go. I'm going to take off one side. The heart is not directly in the middle. It's 2/3 to the left. We call that mediastinum. So this is the pericardial. This is the pericardial cavity. This is the pleural cavity. And this is in the thoracic cavity. And this is the diaphragm that I was talking about. Okay, that being said, the other thing was it's 2/3 to the left. And the way we say that is 2/3 mediastinum. With the sternum We call that area right behind the sternum mediastinum. That's a term I have up here. And it's 2/3 left mediastinum. If you take the palm of your hand and put it right in the middle of your breastbone, which is the sternum, extend your fingers out to the side, that's about where your heart is at. 2/3 to the left. That means 1/3 is on the right. Okay? And they call that mediastinum. Now, over here, I'm going to draw a heart. That's not what your heart looks like. Okay? We do that on Valentine's Day, but that's not the way it looks. But it's not too far off because the heart kind of looks like this. Okay? And if we looked inside, you put a cross in the middle of it, and we have 4 chambers. This portion right here is called the apex. The top 2 chambers, 1 and 3, the odd numbers, are called atria. And the bottom 2 even numbers are called ventricles. The atria are receivers. And the ventricles are the pumps. Got it? Okay, back over here. We said it's 2/3 mediastinum. The bottom portion, the pointed portion of the heart is called the apex. We said that it's found inside the thoracic cavity, specifically in the pericardial cavity. So it's in the thoracic cavity inside the pericardial cavity, inside a space called the pericardial cavity. Are we good? Okay, now we've talked about this before. We said if something is very important for your survival, we put a sac around it. If it's very, very important, we put bone around it also. The heart is obviously very important, so we put a sac around it, and the sac is called the pericardium or pericardial sac. Got it? We also put bone around it because it's very, very important for our survival, and the bone is the rib cage. Now, that sac that goes around the heart, called the pericardium or pericardial sac, has an outside layer called fibrous. I'll put out fibrous, and an inside layer called serous. The inside layer is a double-walled sac or double-walled layer. The outside is called the parietal, and the inside is called the visceral. Sometimes, let me take that back. Many times in the textbook or in a textbook, they'll say visceral, they'll have a hash mark, and they'll put epicardium, or they'll have epicardium in parenthesis or in italics. Okay? They're not the same thing. The epicardium is the outside layer of the heart itself. Let me grab a heart for you. So here's the heart, here's the apex. The atria are up here, the ventricles are down here, and there's a sac around it. The sac is called the pericardium or pericardial sac. It has an outside layer called the fibrous and an inside layer called the serous. The outside of the inside layer, in other words, the serous has 2 layers. The outside layer is called the parietal layer, and the inside is called the visceral layer. The inside lays right against this. That means it touches this. It touches it so well that And if we were in the lab setting, I would take one and dissect it out for you. You have to kind of probe it out. It kind of tears away. It is so stuck together with the outside actual layer of the heart, which is called the epicardium, that the two of them kind of blend together. So when they discuss it, when the authors discuss it, they put visceral layer, epicardium, same thing. No, it's not. It's at the same place at the same time. But the visceral layer is part of the serous membrane that is this part of the pericardial sac. Do you get that? Okay, it's confusing in the book. Now, since we have two layers, we're talking about the parietal and the visceral layer. Since we have two layers, we got to put something in that layer. Okay, so you're saying, okay, what can we put in there and why is it there? Well, let's do the second first. Why is it there? 1, to reduce friction, and 2, to pull away heat. So if you don't want to reduce friction, putting air in there isn't going to do you any good. You got to put a slippery fluid in there. Okay? To pull away heat, you can do it two ways. You can pull it away by air, or you can pull it away by fluid. Fluid is the most consistent. In other words, it'll pull the heat away from your heart at a constant rate for a longer period of time than air. And the reason is the heart is contracting. When it contracts, one of the products of using ATP is heat. You got to pull it away. Okay, now we've established the second part. The first part is we're going to put a fluid in there. Okay, I told you the reasons why, and that fluid has a name. Since it's in this pericardial sac or pericardium, we call it the pericardial fluid. Now, if the sac becomes infected or injured, it will produce more fluid. Or if the fluid itself is infected with something, we call that condition pericarditis. Pericarditis, infection of the pericardial fluid. If we have inflammation or infection of the heart muscle, it's called myocarditis. Muscle. And remember, the muscle of the heart is cardiac muscle. Okay, now there's 3 layers to the heart itself. So I'm going to get rid of this one and draw you another one. Okay, this is the way we're going to draw the heart most of the time. Square with a cross in it. We're good? Now, this would represent the outside layer. We said the outside layer is called the epicardium. Real thin layer. The next layer, I'm going to make it red so you think of muscle red. This is called the myocardium. Notice the suffix cardium, cardium. And then I'll do it in blue. Lining the inside is the third layer, thin again, kind of comparable to the epicardium, and that's called the endocardium. So there's your 3 layers. Outside one, epi. Middle, which is the thickest, myo. Inside, thin again, endocardium. Let's talk about something about that. I'm going to erase this. And this one you're going to actually have to think. So take another hit of coffee. Still in your pajamas. Probably laying in bed. I'm not. Okay. Okay. This time I'm going to draw the heart kind of in the shape it is. Okay. And then we're going to draw the chambers. We're going to draw the individual chambers. One, I'll be consistent with these numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, I did not draw that accidentally. Bad. Drew it on purpose. This is the left side. Remember, when you look at the heart, whenever you look at a picture of the heart, or when you look at the heart model itself, you're always looking at it as you were looking at somebody's chest. So what is on your left is the right. What is on your right is the left. So this is on your left, but this is the right side. The right side deals with unoxygenated blood. The left side deals with oxygenated blood. Okay? Now, I'm going to make this red inside to show the myocardium. Remember the myocardium? Here's where I'm at. Okay. Now, just looking at this, you'll be able to get the answer. Which side has the thickest myocardium? The right side or the left side? And why? Okay. Now, if my drawing is accurate, the left side has thicker myocardium. And that is correct. It does. It's thicker. Why? And the answer is number 4 is the left ventricle. That's the pumps. Remember, the ventricles are the pumps. The even numbers are the pumps, 2 and 4. The left side has to pump it all the way to the body. That means all the way down to your toe and to the top of your head. That takes a lot of muscle. The right side only has to pump it right here where your lungs are at. I'll put that in there. Lungs, lungs. So the right side only has to do this. Where let me do it in green. Where the left side has to do that. Think of it this way. That should be obvious by now, but think of it this way. If you use your left arm to curl 50 pounds and your right arm to curl 10, and you do it for 6 months, are your muscles going to be the same? Is there going to be the same mass? Your answer is, well, obviously not, because the left side has to lift more. You're going to have more muscle mass, more muscle tissue, plasia. Got it? Same thing here. Okay? Now, while I have this up there, I have another thought question for you. One, and I'll write it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move this over so I give you a little more space here. Perfect. Perfect. And when you're good, you're good. Okay. Number 1 is the right atrium. Now, remember, right atrium receives blood from the body. So blood coming in from the body goes into number 1. It's a receiver. Move it over a little bit more so you can see that. Whoop, wrong way. Okay, it's a receiver. Number 2 is the right ventricle. It's a pump. It receives unoxygenated blood, which I'll make it in blue, from number 1. So 2 receives it from 1. Good? Then 2 pumps it to the lungs. So we have lungs right here. Then 3 is the left atrium, and it's a receiver, and it receives it from the lungs. And 4 is the left ventricle, and it's a pump. So I'll draw it in this one, and I'll do red because it's oxygenated. So it comes from the lungs into number 3, which is the left atrium. From 3, it goes into 4, which is the left ventricle, and then the left ventricle pumps it to the body. Are we good? Okay. Which chamber is the largest? 1, 2, 3, or 4? And don't sit there and wait for the answer. I want you to think. Which chamber of the heart is the largest? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. More than likely, okay, you'll change your mind when you get the answer, is 4. Because, and then you would have made a choice, and I'll say, okay, why do you think 4 is the largest chamber? Your response would be, well, because it has to pump it to the whole body. Look how much body is there. Okay. That is good thought. That's a good thought process. Ain't right, but it's good thought process. Where did 4 get the blood from? Just give me a number. Well, it got it from 3. Okay. Where did 3 get it? Well, it got it from the lungs. Where did the lungs get it? Got it from number 2. Where did number 2 get it? From number 1. Where did number 1 get it? From the body. Remember, we have a closed system. Okay, let's think about that. Let's do numbers. Watch this. Let's do numbers. Do it red. Let's say we're going to give a number out there, 100. So we pump 100 milliliters of blood from the left ventricle. Good? I just picked a number. 100. Where did the 100 come from? Well, it came from here. How much had to come from there? Here meaning number 3. How much came from number 3? Well, it had to be 100 because you can't make something from nothing. Well, where did number 3 get it? Well, number 3 got it from the lungs. How much did it get from the lungs? Well, it couldn't have gotten 90 or 80 because it has to have 100. So it had to get 100. Got it. Where did the lungs get it? Well, it got it from number 2. How much did it get? I hope you're seeing a pattern here. It got 100. Where did it get it from? Well, it got it from number 1, the receiver. How much did it get? It got 100. Where'd that 100 come from? The body. Whoop, body. How much did it get? 100. The same 100 that it's going to punch out. So now, what's the answer? If you're still confused, have another hit of coffee or hot chocolate. Okay? It's obvious that all the chambers are the same because you can't get something from nothing. And if you got 100 and you only needed 80, The other 20 can't hang out because behind it is another 100. You get my point. The point is all the chambers are the same. When you do a dissection, unfortunately, we can't do a dissection, but if you did do one, I would open up the left ventricle. You'll swear it's bigger, but it's not. Okay? Are we good with the chambers? Let's take us right over here to chambers. We have a four-chambered heart. Not all living animals have a four-chambered heart. When we think of animals, we think of dogs, cats, and zebras, and lions, and tigers, and bears. Those are all mammals. Mammals and birds have a four-chambered heart. It's the most efficient because it keeps unoxygenated blood separate from oxygenated blood. One side is receiving it and pumping it up to the lungs to be oxygenated, and the other part is taking it from the lungs and pumping it out to the body to take it to the cells. Okay? Heart is a pump. It is a four-chambered pump, two of them being receivers, two of them being pumps. Do you understand? When we get into lower animals, we arose, and we've talked about this before, we evolved from reptiles. Reptiles gave rise to mammals and birds. Reptiles have a three-chambered heart. It only has one pump. It only has one ventricle. So that means there's a mixture of blood. If there's a mixture of blood, it's inefficient, which means reptiles cannot do extended exercise because they run out of ATP, because they run out of oxygen, go to the cell to undergo cellular respiration. Do you get it? Okay. We said that there are, change colors for you. There are two atria, and atria are the receivers. And there's two ventricles, and those are the pumps. In order to do this, you have to have a system of valves. So if I want the blood to go over there, I have to be able to open up a valve to send the blood over there. If I want it to go over here, I have to close this valve because there's only a certain amount of blood, and I've got to ship it this way. So there's a series of 4 valves. Okay? 2 of those valves are called atrioventricular. Take that word and separate it. Atrium, ventricle. It's the valve that goes between the receivers and the pump. And we have 2 semilunar, and the semilunar are lead, right now, this is going to be on your exam, semilunar lead out of the heart. Okay? Atrioventricular are within the heart, semilunar lead out of the heart. Did you get that? Okay? Now, what I wanted to do is to kind of give you a practical thing you may have seen. When you have those big, heavy machinery where you see the operators moving these levers and the arm or whatever it might be is moving up, down, sideways, whatever. Okay, what is causing it to move is the engine, the motor is the pump, is the ventricle. And when it's running, it's moving oil inside. If you don't open up any valves, the oil just stays around the pump, around the motor. When you move a valve, you open it up, then the pressure of the motor pushes the oil that pushes on what's called a ram, which is like a telescope. And what it does is it moves, because since oil cannot compress, it moves that part with a lot of power. When you close that valve, then it stops. Do you understand? Heart works the same way, only 4 sets of valves. By one valve opening up, blood's going to go that way. It's going to go to the lungs. By another valve opening up, it's going to go into the ventricles. Another valve opening up, it's going to go from the lungs to the ventricle. I mean, from the atrium to the ventricle. Another valve opens up, sends it to the body. Do you see how it works? It's a valve. We have 4. We have 4 chambers, and we have 4 valves. Are we good? Okay, moving on. Now, all blood returns from the body into the right atrium, which is number 1. And it comes by three major vessels: superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, and the coronary vein. Okay? Superior vena cava, from the shoulders up. All the blood that is from the shoulders up, collect back into one blood vessel called the superior vena cava. Okay? All blood from the lower part of the body comes back to the heart by another single blood vessel called the inferior vena cava. And then we know that the heart itself is made of cells, so it requires blood, and that's the coronary circuit. Okay? We have three circuits. I don't have it up here, so write this down. We have three circuits. I don't have it up here. Write it down. A circuit means it leaves the heart, goes directly to a certain part, and comes back. We have three circuits. One circuit goes to the heart itself. It's called the coronary circuit. The second one goes to the lungs. It's called the pulmonary circuit. The third circuit goes to the body. We call it the systemic circuit. Three circuits: coronary, pulmonary, systemic circuit. Are we good? Anyway, regardless of where those circuits are, do you see what all blood's got to come back to the right atrium, and it comes back through the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, coronary vein. There's another one called a zygos. I'll talk about, oh, I have it right here. A zygos vein. Since we have so much blood in the abdominal and thoracic cavity, the inferior superior vena cava can't pick all that up. And it comes in, there's another smaller blood vessel called the azygos vein, right here, that picks up any blood that the superior vena cava has missed and dumps it back in there. And that's what that is. Got it? A zygos vein. Anyway, the ones I want you to remember are the three: superior, inferior, coronary. All right. And we said it feeds everything into the, change colors for you. I want you to get bored. Comes back to the right atrium. Remember, the atriums are the receivers. Now, next thing I want you to see is the 60-40 right here. As you were sitting there in your pajamas in your bed, or sitting on the couch, pretend like you're paying attention, okay? Your blood is beginning to pool, P-O-O-L, and it's going to pool in the venous side. So in other words, you're going to have more blood in the veins than you are the arteries. Here's the reason why. We said we have a pressurized system, a closed circulatory system. We still have that closed circulatory system. But you know that when you're dealing with liquid and you want to retain pressure, that whenever you go further away, you have to go to a smaller diameter tube. So for an example, if you're doing irrigation in your front lawn, you start with a 3/4 inch pipe, and by the time you are supplying the sprinklers, you're in a 1/2 or 3/8 inch. You will retain pressure. So the way the body does it is it starts off in the aorta, which is about this big around. Okay? And by the time you're done, you're in capillaries that have the diameter of hair. Oh, wrong. Have the diameter of hair. So you're going from larger to smaller, and that retains pressure. But after you offload oxygen and nutrients to the cells in capillary beds, you're picked up by venous capillaries. From venous capillaries, diameter of a hair, you're going to venules, which are about 4 times the diameter, and then you go to veins, which could be as big as my thumb. So what happens, you're going from a smaller diameter to a larger diameter, and you lose pressure. Think of it this way. the smaller ones can't fill up the bigger ones because there's not enough in it, which means we have to have help. When you're going from your feet back up to your heart, if there's nothing in pressure, it's just going to start pooling, P-O-O-L-I-N-G. So what the body has done is it's put in, see if I can get it going for you. It's put valves in your veins. Your veins have valves in them. And if you do this to your arm, depending on how much adipose tissue you have, you'll see what looks like little checkpoints about every 2 centimeters. Those are valves. Okay? I don't know if I can get that to you. Let's try. Okay, that's a good vein right there. Can you see the light spot there and there and there? Okay, those are valves. So what happens is the valves overlay like this. Picture a wall here and a wall here. And these are attached to the wall and they overlay like this. So when the blood comes up, it forces open those flaps of tissue. And then when the heart relaxes, which is called the diastolic phase, blood tries to come back down, but it gets stuck behind the valves and closes them. So the next pump, it goes to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, till it's back up to the heart. Okay? Got it? That's the way your venous side works. Arterial side does not have valves in it because it's pressurized. Now, getting back to the 60-40 split. When you're sitting there, you're not doing much, so the blood is starting to stay on the venous side, because also besides the valves, body muscles contracting help bring the blood back. Okay? So when you're sitting there, your muscles, your skeletal muscles are not contracting, so the blood is pooling. And it pools at about a 60-40 split. Now, when you get up because you need another cup of coffee or you have to go to the bathroom, you put down your laptop or you'll put down your tablet or whatever you're looking at this on, and you'll start moving. When you start moving, your skeletal muscles will contract and they'll start putting that extra blood, 60, back into the arterial side. And when it does that, it starts 60, 59, 58, and it gets close to 50-50. Got it? Never quite get there. Never quite gets there, but it gets close. Okay? So when you get up and start moving, you remember that 100, 100, 100 we did over there? Well, it's still going 100, 100, but you've got to get the blood from the 60 side to the 40 side, which means you're going to have to squeeze in a little bit of blood on the arterial side, which means you have to go through these chambers. When you do that, there has to be like a little reservoir in the receivers, which is the atria, that you could put an extra milliliter or two. So after maybe 20 or 30 heartbeats, you're getting close to 50-50 again. Do you see where I'm going with this? Okay, those little storage areas are called auricles, and that's what's represented right here and right here. Only the atria have it, and they're little extra storage places. So the auricle is for storage, and you see now why I have it on that 60-40 split. Are we good? The next thing you see up is right atrioventricular valve, also called the tricuspid. Tricuspid tells you what it looks like. So if we go to the right side and we open this up, this is the chamber, the right atrium. There's a hole down here. There's a hole down here. That leads into the right ventricle. There's the valve, the right atrioventricular valve. This is trabecula. Talked about trabecula, I'll talk about it again in a minute. Okay, there is 3 cusps on this valve. There's 3 cusps on this valve. 1, 2, and then in the back 3. And then you can see there's little white lines kind of coming down into the floor of the ventricle. And it's going to look like strings. You're going to see that's called Chordae Tendinae. And then attaching those strings is papillary muscle, which is down here at the bottom. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, the board is full. I'm going to erase some of this so I have some more drawing space. And I'm going to draw how the valves work and how you get the lub-dub sound. Okay, where we're at right now is I'm going to explain to you how a valve works. Okay, I'll do the atrioventricular valves. Okay, that separates the atria from the receivers from the pumps, the atria from the ventricles, and whether your left side, right side does exactly the same way. Okay, so here's your heart. Here's the chambers, 1, 2, 3, 4, left side, right side. Now, right in the floor of the atria, the ceiling of the ventricle is a valve. This is a tricuspid valve. Put that down like that, even though it goes up in the back. These are the valves. This is the tissue making up the valves. Now the valve, I'm going to make it blue because it's unoxygenated. The valve is held down to the floor of the ventricles by papillary muscle. This is papillary muscle. Okay, connecting the papillary muscle to the valves itself are little string-like ligaments or string-like tendons called Chordae Tendinae. Chordae Tendinae. Now, when blood goes from, remember, it's unoxygenated. From the receivers, the atria, to the ventricles, the pumps, it goes through this hole, through that valve. That valve does not open and close by the papillary muscle pulling on the Chordae Tendinae and then magically opens this up. That's not the way it works. What happens is blood willingly comes down into the ventricle because there's nothing there. So the blood's going to go where there's the least pressure. You got 100% here, and you got nothing down here. So it's going to flow down at an 80-20 percentage. 80% of it is willingly going to come down in here and start filling up in here. The other 20 has to be pumped a little bit. And I'll bring that back up. The 80-20, I'll bring that up when we do the PQRST wave, which you get with an ECG. We'll talk about that. Now, let's just talk about it being all the blood. So when the blood comes down into the right or the left, doesn't make any difference, ventricle, and the muscle itself, the myocardium, begins to contract. The blood wants to turn around and come back up. But the valve's going to shut. When it shuts because the blood is getting back behind the valve. So when the pressure starts to increase, this valve wants to collapse and close off that point. And that's exactly what it does. And the sound that you hear is lub. The lub sound, when you use a stethoscope and listen to somebody's heartbeat, it goes lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. Okay? The lub is from both the right. Now, both the right and left constrict at the exact same time. So both these valves are closing at the same time. It's not going right side, left side, right, left side. No, 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 no. It's right and left together. Got the lub sound. You know what the lub sounds is? The closing of the AV valves, atrioventricular valves. And you see how they close. Blood itself closes that valve. Now, if some of these Chordae Tendinae are broken, torn, then part of this valve can come back up here. When it does, we call that prolapse. Prolapse means it goes the wrong way. Your eyelids are supposed to go up. If you pull them down, you're prolapsing your eyelids. Your rectum is supposed to be on the other side of your anus. If it's on the outside, it is called a prolapsed rectum. The uterus, the cervix, is supposed to be up inside the vaginal walls. If it extends down and starts to come out, it's called a prolapsed uterus. Do you understand what the word prolapsed means? Okay, so to prevent, this is what I want you to know for your exam, to prevent prolapse of the atrioventricular valves, papillary muscle, Chordae Tendinae. Do you understand? Okay, so we've taken care of this. I showed you what the azygos vein was. Let's go over here. Oops. We're going to have to move this here, so we're going to go wrong. Maybe that's right. Let's see. Yep, this is right. Okay, let's look at the terms we've done. Chordae Tendinae, you have them both in the right and left ventricles. They connect the papillary muscle to the actual valve. And the function of it is to prevent prolapse. Trabecula, remember that's that extra tissue on the inside of both the ventricle and the atria. Not the extra tissue for getting it from 60-40, not that tissue. It's so the chambers can expand and contract. Yes, tissue from it. Okay, that brings us to the semilunar. That brings us to the semilunar valves. Semilunar valves lead out of the ventricles. So, would be all the way down the other end. No, I'll do it right here. I'll do it right here. You can see me, yes. So we're going to draw a heart again. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take right here, and they always draw it this way. They always draw it with a chicken foot. And this is, since this is going to the lungs, this is called the pulmonary semilunar valve. That's what that's called. Now, I'm going to go inside and draw what it looks like. And there's flaps of skin, not skin, there's flaps of tissue that extend up like this. So once again, I'm doing it in blue because it's unoxygenated going to the lungs. So when blood fills up in here and the ventricles are now empty, the blood wants to come back down and end up back in the ventricle. But it can't because the mere fact that blood is trying to go back closes that valve, and I'll do it in green so you can see it. So the valve ends up doing this, closes on itself. Okay? And it overlaps, and it's so thick that the blood can't get in here, so it continues on its trip to the lungs. That's how a semilunar valve works. And the one coming out of the right side is the pulmonary semilunar that's going to the lungs. And here's where I'm at. And the first thing you have is a trunk. It isn't an artery until it splits into the right and left half side. It's not an artery yet. So it's called the pulmonary trunk. So this is the trunk. Not trunk, trunk. Okay? Pulmonary trunk. Pulmonary artery. Remember, arteries carry blood away from the heart. In all cases, except the pulmonary circuit, arteries carry oxygenated blood also. But in the pulmonary circuit, it's flipped. So a true statement 100% of the time is arteries carry blood away from the heart. True in 66 1/3% of the circuits, arteries carry oxygenated blood also, except in the pulmonary. Are we good? From the pulmonary artery, we go to the lungs. And now we got to get back to the left side. So we got to go through the receivers. I'm going to use the same one. Only now we're going to change color to red. Because now it's oxygenated. These are pulmonary veins, because we're carrying blood back to the heart. And it's going to go into the left atrium. Okay, I'm going to go through that with the model for you. Blood that leaves the right ventricle goes up through the pulmonary, right here, pulmonary semilunar valve. This is the pulmonary trunk, and you can see that it splits right here. This goes to the left side, this goes to the right side, right and left lungs. So these are pulmonary arteries. When it comes back, I got to pull this around. When it comes back by way of pulmonary veins. Pulmonary veins. See them? Pulmonary veins. And it looks like this side, I'm going to hold my finger there. It looks like this side comes into the right side, but it doesn't. It goes all the way across the back, and this is part of the left atrium. And it dumps into here. So if you look inside very carefully, you still can't see it because there's a shadow. I don't know what to tell you, man. You need to be in lab. There you can see the right and left coming into the right atrium. I mean the left atrium. Right and left pulmonary arteries coming in there. Okay? Now from here it's going to go through the left atrioventricular valve that has three names. Left atrioventricular valve, bicuspid valve, mitral valve. Bicuspid because instead of having three cusps, it only has two. And you can see the trabecula. Okay? Now I'm going to draw that for you. Here's where they come in. They go through to the pump, the left ventricle, through the same setup with Chordae Tendinae, Papillary Muscle, but instead of having three, it's only going to have two. Got it? And then it's going to leave. And when it leaves the ventricle by way of semilunar valve. And the semilunar valve is the aortic semilunar valve. And this is the aorta. And the valve is set up the same way. I just draw one right next to it, and I draw red instead of blue. Okay? Set up the same way. Got it? So let's go over here and do some checkoffs. Pulmonary vein brings it back from the lungs, goes into the left atrium, which is a receiver, and then we have an auricle again. Remember the auricle, that little flap? And that reason that auricle is there is so we can get that 60-40 split close back to 50-50. Then it goes through the valve that separates the atria from the ventricle. Guess what? Ventricle's not up there, huh? Okay, close your eyes. Okay, there it is. See, it was there the whole time. Left ventricle goes through the valve to the left ventricle. Chordae Tendinae still there. Papillary Muscle still there. Yada, yada, yada. And then we go out through the aortic semilunar valve because we're leaving. Now we're going to the body. And now we're in the aorta. Okay? Sometimes aorta has an A, sometimes it has an AE. I put it with an AE. Aorta. Okay? Now over here, I'm going to draw the aorta. Here's where it begins, in the ventricle. Semilunar valve. Up, bends. Okay? This is the aorta. Specifically, the aorta is made up of 3 parts. Ascending, arch, descending. Aorta, ascending, arch, descending. Okay? Okay, you're going to take a break, go to the bathroom, get another cup of coffee. I'm going to erase all this stuff, and we're going to start with this drawing right here. Okay, we're back. I have to move this this way. Oh, wrong. Okay, you can see I got something else on the board now. We left off with the aortic semilunar valve. We said that leads to the aorta. We said the aorta is divided into 3 parts: ascending, arch, descending. Okay? Now, branches off of the aorta. The first one is right here. Left, right. So I'll put left, right, coronary artery. Right, left, coronary artery. Here's where I'm at. Now, as we get up to the top, right at the arch, there's some more branches off the arch. First one, brachiocephalic. Second one, left common carotid. Third one, left subclavian. And then down the descending it goes. Let's do some checking off. Now this is off of the arch. This is off of the arch. Brachiocephalic, that's number 1. Number 2, left common carotid. Number 3, left subclavian. I'll show you on the model. I open this up, one wants to keep slipping off. You see that? See that branch right there? See that branch right there? If you don't, it's there. I'm touching it. That is the coronary. This is the right side. You can't see the left side because it's buried underside there, but it pops out right here. Okay. Here is the whole aorta. Here's the whole aorta. Ascending, arch, descending. Descending comes down here, and in a minute I'll show you where that goes. This is the brachiocephalic, left common carotid, left subclavian. Okay? Now, when you have a hose, you're holding onto a garden hose, and there's no water running through it, and you're back about, let's say, 2 feet, 3 feet. So it's making an arc. Got it? It's making an arc down like this. You're holding on to it. What happens when you turn on the water? What happens with the end? It starts to come up and start flopping around, doesn't it? Same thing with your heart and your aorta and the pulmonary artery. If when the ventricles contract and blood shoots into the aorta, this end's going to want to come flying up. But there's a little piece of tissue right here. Right here. That tissue is called Ligamentum Arteriosum, and it connects the aortic arch with the pulmonary trunk. See it? Aortic arch with the pulmonary trunk, just before it splits into the pulmonary arteries. That's what holds the arch in place. Do you understand? And that's why I have Ligamentum Arteriosum here. Now you see another word that looks really close, except for the first part's different. Ductus Arteriosum. You're thinking, what the heck is Ductus Arteriosum? Okay, back to the model. During development, embryological development in the uterus, this is actually a tube. So you can bypass the lungs. Blood can go right from through the heart, through the right ventricle, and then get into the aorta and be supplied, because mom's doing the oxygenating for you. The heart and lungs aren't working yet. The heart's beating, but it still hasn't formed, doesn't have the valves, that kind of stuff. The muscle is contracting. So this is a duct, and a duct is called Ductus Arteriosum. Just before you were born and the lungs start to become functional, this closes off and becomes Ligamentum Arteriosum. So Ductus Arteriosum becomes Ligamentum Arteriosum. Do you understand? Got it? Okay. If you keep hearing that buzz on my phone, it's because you guys are calling me. Okay. I get texts I get probably about 120 of them a day, and they're going off constantly. Yesterday, I almost had a nervous breakdown because of it. Okay, so don't call me to say, hey, what's happening, man? Okay, so anyway, we went to the descending aorta. I showed you where that is. Yeah. Now, the descending aorta here comes all the way down into your pelvis, and then it terminates. There is no more descending aorta, and this is called the iliac artery. I'm going to show you what that looks like. Okay, we call this the standing kidney in lab. This is the vena cava. Since it's below, it's called the inferior vena cava. It is formed from the iliac veins. So you got an iliac vein on the right side, iliac vein on the left side, forms the inferior vena cava. The descending aorta goes all the way down and terminates into the iliac arteries, right side, left side. So it looks something like this. Got it? Got it? It's in my body. Got it? Okay? So the question on the exam would be, the descending aorta terminates into what? The answer would be iliac arteries. The inferior vena cava begins or is formed from what? Iliac veins. You have it? Good. Now, hang on. I gotta get another one. You see these little branches right here? These are major branches off of the descending aorta. Their opposing venous supply, same one. It picks up as you go along. So when blood is coming down the descending aorta and wants to go to the stomach or wants to go to the kidney or wants to go to the spleen, it takes a branch off the descending aorta. Do you understand? So we call that major branches off the descending aorta. And I've written a few of them up here for you. Splenic goes to the spleen. Gastric goes to the stomach. Intestinal goes to the intestine. Mesenteric goes to the mesentery. Renal goes to the kidney. Hepatic goes to the liver. Now there's more of them. Those are the major ones. Got it? Okay, now as we go from arteries, we get smaller and there's more branches. Those are called arterioles. Then there's branches off of those called capillaries. And capillaries is where we can have an exchange. So for an example, let's say this was an artery. Pump it up here. Let's say that's an artery right there. It's not, it's a vein, but let's say it's an artery. And there's a cell right next to it. Can that cell get nutrients from that artery? The answer is no, it can't. Question, why? Because this artery has 3 layers. The blood cannot go through those 3 layers. As you remember, when we look at the lungs, you have to have a single layer of squamous epithelium. Your blood vessels are composed of 3 layers. And we don't call them layers, we call them tunics. Here's where I am. 3 layers to blood vessels. Tunica externa is made of elastic connective tissue. Remember we looked at it in a microscope and we said, whoops, you can't see me. Let me try that again. I'm going to move you. Wrong. Okay, here's where I am. Do that again. There are 3 layers of the blood vessels. They're called tunics. The outside one is called tunica externa, and it's made of elastic connective tissue. Remember that? Remember the elastic? It was loose and dense, and it was under dense. And remember, it was the black squiggly lines, the bad hair day? That's on the outside layer. The middle one is media, tunica media, and it's made out of smooth muscle. Made out of smooth muscle. Because remember, the blood vessels constrict, blood goes someplace else. You have to constrict it. The only thing that can constrict is muscle, and it's smooth muscle. And the third one is tunica interna, which is endothelium, squamous epithelium. And that's what capillaries are made out of. Simple squamous epithelium. It can diffuse through tunica interna, which is what capillaries are made out of. So back here, you have all 3 of these layers. It can't get through there. Okay, it meaning nutrients, gases, waste products. Do we understand? you have three different types of capillaries. You have three different types of capillaries. My fingers represent the cells of the capillaries. Okay? You have three types of capillaries grouped into two arbitrary groups. Those two arbitrary groups are called continuous and discontinuous. There's only one type of continuous, and that's called continuous. And if I was to show you what they look like this. No holes. No holes. Discontinuous has two subdivisions. Those that have little holes and those that have big holes. Little holes are called fenestrated. I'll put little. And big holes are called sinusoid. Fenestrated we find in the kidney. Sinusoid we find in lymph nodes, the spleen. That means you want blood to get out right away, real quick. So you want the holes big. All throughout your body, continuous. Do you understand? Now, there are times, conditions the body finds itself in where it needs continuous capillaries to become discontinuous. It can't just do it because your brain says do it. It's under the influence of a hormone. Got it? And that hormone is called histamine. Now, I'm going to move you over here to the blood cells. Basophil, if you remember from the chart, basophil, if you look down here, basophil, which is this one right here, and it tells you what a basophil does, it says secretes histamine. So when you have an infection, which we mean an invader, that is not in your blood, it's in between your cells, like in muscle cells or liver cells or kidney cells, whatever kind of cell it might be. The white blood cells have to get out of your circulatory system. In order to do that, they have to come out through the capillary beds. In order for them to come out of the capillary beds, continuous capillaries must become discontinuous. Do you understand? What triggers that, I call it a hormone, it's enzyme. Histamine is really, you know what? Let me make sure of that. I'll put you on pause. Okay, we were talking about histamine. And I said, was it a hormone or was it a enzyme? It's kind of more like an enzyme. They call it a neurotransmitter. So what it does is open up gates. All you need to know is it is a chemical compound, and it's released by a basophil, and it causes continuous capillaries to become fenestrated. That process scientifically is called diapedesis. Diapedesis. I'm going to take you back over, so we're going to move this. See your lab? See me? Pretty good, huh? Okay, here's where we're at. Diapedesis. One more time. Diapedesis is the process of continuous capillaries becoming discontinuous. I use the word fenestrated. It's called diapedesis. It's under the influence of histamine. Histamine, which is released from a basophil. Okay, you see two more terms here. Angiogenesis and Vasa Vasora. Angiogenesis means the making of new blood vessels. That is the scientific term for making of new blood vessels. Angiogenesis. Angio, vessel, genesis, new or to make. Do you understand? So when you grow, when you're younger, you're growing this way. When you're older, you're growing this way. You need more blood vessels. The making of the blood vessels is called angiogenesis. Vasa Vasorum is a term that means blood supply to the blood vessels. Vasa Vasora means blood supply to blood vessels. Now, we're back to this blood vessel right here. It has 3 tunics, 3 layers. Therefore, can the blood inside of there feed those 3 layers of cells? And the answer is no, it cannot. Okay, so what it has to do is it has to exit the vein, the vein or the artery, doesn't make any difference. The artery, in this case, I'm talking about, it exits the artery, becomes an arteriole, then becomes a capillary bed wrapped around the blood vessel itself. There you can have nutrient exchange. So the blood supply, the capillary blood supply to the blood vessels is called Vasa Vasora. Okay? Now, next term we see up there, right here, is anastomosis. Anastomosis means when you have more than one blood supply to an area. It's kind of like a backup. So if I go down here to my hand, there's an arch here called the superficial palmar arch. Superficial palmar arch. It's being fed from the radial artery and the ulnar artery. And it feeds this arch right here. If I cut off the blood to the radial side, the ulnar side will pick it up. That process of having a backup or being fed by more than one blood vessel is called anastomosis. Okay, next section, the heartbeat. The heartbeat. When the heart contracts, that phase is called systole or systolic phase. When the heart relaxes, it is called diastole or diastolic. You have probably seen the systole written in a number 120 and the diastole written in the number 80, 120 over 80. What that is a measurement of the pressure when the ventricles contract or the ventricles relax. So when the ventricles contract, the blood then goes through the aortic semilunar valve or the pulmonary semilunar valve. We're just going to watch the aortic into the aorta. That pressure can be measured. Since we can't get it accurately around the heart because the heart's in the thoracic cavity, we use the arm, usually the left arm, because the arch goes that way. Does that make sense? It's a measure of the pressure. So as soon as the ventricle contracts, we measure that, and that's the systolic, the high end. When the ventricles relax and begin to fill with blood, that is called the relaxation phase or the diastolic phase. That is not 0, that's about 80, because remember we have a closed system, it's pressurized. Okay, I'm going to shut this off, erase the board, and put on the heartbeat. And we're going to talk about the lub-dub sound. We're going to talk about the AV, SA, bundle of His, that kind of stuff, what makes a heart contract. And it's electricity. Okay, we were talking about the heartbeat. And we said the systolic is the contraction phase. And we're talking about contraction of the ventricles. Diastolic is the relaxation phase of the ventricles. Now, what the question should be, what makes this happen? You remember we talked about the nervous system and depolarization, and we also saw in tissues, we had intercalated discs that denoted cardiac muscle. Well, intercalated discs are gaps, a gap junction, desmosomes. And what flows through there real quickly is sodium. Well, you know what triggers the release of sodium is your nervous system, okay? An impulse. Well, the impulse has to start somewhere, and it starts at the sinoatrial node, also called the SA node or pacemaker. So we're going to go back over here and draw our heart. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Right here, somewhere. Normally, it's in the back top superior portion of the right atrium, but doesn't have to be there. That is a collection of dendrites we call a node. A node is a collection point, okay? Like a lymph node, collection point for lymph. This is the lymph node. This is the SA node. Pacemaker, that's where it starts. From there, it goes over to here, which is the next node called the AV, or atrioventricular node. From there, it jumps over right about here to another node called the bundle of His, capital H, capital I, capital S, bundle of His. Then I'll do it in red so you can see it. So it goes from SA, that's where it begins, to AV. From AV, it goes to the bundle of His. From the bundle of His, this is a septum, the septum that divides the right and left half. It travels down there, and these are fibers called interseptal fibers. From there, they branch out. Now what they're going to do is they're going to travel all the way around the ventricle, both sides, and it's going to trigger sodium to go through the intercalated discs, those gap junctions, and get to the cells so it can cause contraction. And these bundles are called Purkinje fibers. Purkinje fibers are the ones that are going to depolarize and have sodium, open up ion gates, allow sodium to get inside the cell to cause it to contract. I haven't done muscle contraction yet, but when I do, I'll pick up and remind you of this discussion. One of these loops back up, I shouldn't say one, several of them loop back up to the SA node and continue it. And it's called autorhythmia. Autorhythmic. Our heartbeat is autorhythmic. It starts when you're embryological development in mom, and it continues throughout your life cycle, hoping never to stop. If it stops, hopefully you can jumpstart it again, otherwise you're dead. Okay, so we go sinoatrial node, AV node, atrioventricular node, bundle of His, interseptal fibers, Purkinje fibers, and I'm going to put an asterisk because that's the ones that cause the depolarization around the ventricles. Now, can we measure that? Can we measure how much electricity is going through there and what's happening to the valves? Now, remember, we said the lub sound comes from the closing of AVs. The dub sound comes from closing of semilunars. So lub, closing of the atrioventricular valve, both left and right, and the dub sound comes from the closing of the semilunars, both pulmonary and aortic. If you have an abnormal sound, it's called a murmur. An abnormal sound heartbeat is called a murmur. And usually that is partially due to a prolapse valve. Usually you hear it kind of sucking. Okay, now back over to PQRST wave. I'm going to move you down here. Hey, got it right the first time. Okay. Graph. Remember, don't fear a graph. Usually on the x-axis, time. and then you're measuring it against something. In this case here, we're going to measure it against millivolts. Got it? And the graph looks like this. You're going along, and you have a little bit of millivolts going on in there. Okay? Then you have big peak, come back. And this is a PQRST wave. A PQRST wave. So each time something happens, we give it a letter. And if you're like me, I thought, well, why did you do A, B, C, D, E instead of PQRST wave? I don't know, look it up and let me know. The first hump you see is the P wave. The second thing you see happening is the Q, R, S, and this is T. And this is what's happening. You can see that there's more electricity. Okay, we measure it in millivolts going on in those humps. And here's what it stands for. P is that we don't call it electricity, we call it depolarization. Depolarization of the atria. Remember that 80-20 I talked about? And I said 80% of the blood come out of the atria into the ventricles because there's nothing there. They voluntarily go down. The blood leaves and goes down into the ventricle. That is the 80%. The last 20 has to be squeezed out. It doesn't take much to squeeze out 20%. And you've heard of commercials. I suffer from AFib. A stands for atrial. Fib stands for fibrillation. That means it's not consistent. It's not on a pattern. It's not an autorhythmic pattern. So that means sometimes you get that extra 20%, sometimes you don't. So the symptomology of somebody that had AFib would probably be lethargic, loss of energy, yada, yada, yada. Got it? Got it? So you can survive if you have AFib. Okay, atrial fibrillation. Okay, so the depolarization of the atria, remember I said we were coming back to 80-20, is measured in the P wave. Q, R, S is always together, and that's depolarization of ventricles. Depolarization of the ventricles. Okay, then the T wave, which is bigger than the P wave, the T is repolarization of ventricles. Okay, watch. Depolarization of the atria. Depolarization of the ventricles. Repolarization of the ventricles. So your question should be, and you should have this question, where's the measure of the millivolts for the repolarization of the atria? They depolarized here, but I don't see them repolarizing because it's in this and it's masked, M-A-S-K-E-D. So in the depolarization is also the repolarization of the atria. And remember that the reason it's not a big wave is because it's only 20%. It doesn't take much to squeeze out that little extra. Okay, so that is a electrocardiogram, ECG, sometimes pronounced EKG, and it's a measure of the PQRST wave. If they're abnormal, somebody knows how to read that, say, oh, this is the problem the person has. Bradycardia, term, means a heart rate less than 60. Heart rate less than 60, bradycardia. Do you understand? Tachycardia, greater than 100. So if your heartbeat is greater than 100 times per minute, you are in tachycardia. Okay? Flutter is when it's over 200. Fibrillation, and you can have atrial which we just talked about, AFib, and ventricular. Atrial fibrillation, that's that 80-20. Ventricular, you can't survive from. And what fibrillation means is you do not have a normal heartbeat where the valves are, you're having the lub-dub sound. The valves are opening and closing as they should. So what happens is blood is rushing so fast through it, this is called conduction. The conduction from your heart is abnormal. You don't see me, sorry about that. That the conduction through your heart is abnormal. That is called a stage of fibrillation. AFib, you could survive. Ventricular fibrillation, you're deceased. Okay? Lub sound, closing of the AV valves. Dub sound, closing of the semilunar valves. It's going to be on your exam. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to shut this off. This will be uploaded as the lecture on cardiovascular system. Then when I come back, I'll start a new one on the lab on cardiovascular system.